So like I said, today is our next to last day of poetry. We are going to talk today about some poems that are all about death. But along the way, hopefully these are kind of life-affirming as well. That's kind of the point of each of them. It's not to depress you. It's to say death is part of life, and it's something that we should talk about somewhat in our society, a bit more than we do. Something that we should think about how we relate to this concept, because it's inevitable. It's going to happen to everyone we know and to every one of us. And so pretending that it's not, pretending that it's never going to affect us is kind of burying your head in the sand. But taking some time to look at poems that talk about this subject. One of my favorite poets is a guy named A.E. Housman, and he's got a poem called Terrence, This Is Stupid Stuff, in which he's basically having an argument with his friends who are telling him, why do you write about depressing stuff all the time? Why can't you write about happy stuff? And he says, you write about depressing stuff so that when depressing stuff happens in real life, it doesn't sneak up on you and whack you over the head and knock you out. You prepare yourself. And he compares it to taking tiny amounts of poison over the course of your life so that when somebody tries to poison you, you're immune to it. It doesn't affect you as strongly. This metaphor he uses of a king who people kept trying to poison him, and he lived to a ripe old age. Mithridates, he died old. It's the final line of that poem. We talk about poems that are about death, about depressing subjects, to help us process it. And again, I think you'll be surprised to see how life-affirming some of these poems really are. So our first one that we're looking at today is, see if I can flip the camera, if I can figure out how to flip the camera. But I can't. Oh, there it is. First one we're talking about today is Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. The wise men at their end know dark is right. Because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men, who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late they grieve it on its way, do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men, near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay, rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Now, you might have noticed a little bit of repetition in that poem. And I said from the very start when we were talking about poetry in this class that I would never talk about the form of a poem, what rhyme scheme it fits or whatever, unless it was vital to your understanding of that poem. And so I just want to point out very briefly that this poem, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, is an example of a French form of poetry called a villanelle. Now, normally when you look at poems, repetition of sounds is the most common type of form that you see. Maybe it's alliteration or assonance, in which certain consonant sounds or vowel sounds are repeated. Or maybe it's rhyme, like we have here, where we have night, light, right, bright, flight, sight, height. But maybe it goes even deeper than that with the repetition. There's a type of poetry called a sestina, in which it's 6 groups of 6 lines, and each line contains a word. And there are 6 words that keep getting repeated in different order throughout the whole poem. And the only thing that follows this form is that this word is going to pop up in one of the lines of each group of 6. And the idea is that these 6 words are kind of the central images, the central metaphors of the poem, and they keep getting repeated, they keep being touched upon. Well, here it goes even deeper than that with the repetition. You obviously noticed that line, "Do not go gentle into that good night," apart from being the title, is also line 1, line 6, line 12, and line 18. While the third line, "Rage, rage against the dying of the light," was line 3, but it also recurred as line 9, line 15, and then the final line of the poem, line 19. Now, the reason why this form of poetry uses this level of repetition is that it's a lot like the papers that we write in this class. That the first 3 lines are introducing an idea. That's your introduction, essentially. "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light," is introducing you to the concept of death. How death is being referred to as that good night, the dying of the light. That's the central metaphor here. And his point about death is to not accept that death is part of life, but instead to fight against it, to hold it off for as long as you possibly can, to eke as much beauty and joy out of life while you still can. And so in that way, it's a lot similar to the very first poem we looked at in the unit, "To His Coy Mistress," like a week and a half ago. Maybe longer than that, 2 weeks ago, I'm not sure. In that poem, Andrew Marvell's saying, we're all going to die someday, so you got to live in the moment. You got to live in the now. You got to live for today. And so Thomas, too, is saying something similar. "Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Push it off. Hold it back for as long as you can. Live life to its fullest while you're still here." And so then it uses that first line and that third line repeated through the poem to come back to that point, but from different angles, from different perspectives. And so you notice that in the second stanza, he talks about wise men, then good men in the third, wild men in the fourth, and grave men in the fifth. And so those are like your 4 body paragraphs in an essay. 4 examples where he's saying wise men do not go gentle, good men rage, rage. And he's talking about these different types of people with these qualities, and why they don't accept their fate. They don't accept that death is part of life. They fight against it for as much life as they possibly can. So starting with the wise men. The wise men know dark is right. They know that death is a part of life. You can't escape it. But they have this wisdom within them that they want to share. They want to share that wisdom with somebody else, spark an idea, spark some lightning. And we talked about mimetics. We talked about the sharing of ideas in this class earlier. And that's what they want to do. They have this wisdom that they don't want to die with them. They want that wisdom to live on. They want that wisdom to go from one person to the next, like a bolt of lightning from one person's brain to another. And they use their words to convey that wisdom. And they want more time to share that wisdom so their wisdom doesn't die with them. So they do not go gentle. They don't accept their fate. They want more time to share that wisdom. Good men, they've done good deeds. They've helped people. They've tried to create positive vibes in the world, try to make the world a better place. And they look at what they've done and they see that it's just a drop in the bucket, that there's still more evil in the world that could be combated, more good that they could do. They judge their deeds to be frail. If I can stick around, there's more people I could help. There's more good that I could do. And so they want more time to do more good for the world. Then you got the wild men. Wild men, they party. They live it up. They're the kind of people who, you go to a party, and they're at that party, and when people start leaving, they're like, no, what are you doing? We can't leave yet. It's early still. Come on, stay out. One more drink. Shots? Who's for shots? Anybody? Shots? And you're like, this is a bad idea, but you go along with it. The wild men, they're partiers. They're the kind of people that you go to a concert and they're like, no, you can't be done yet. Second encore. Woo! One more song. One more song. Everybody, one more song. The concert finally ends and they're like, so where are we going next? Like, what do you mean where we're going next? I'm going home to go to bed. No, come on. Let's go. I know an after hours place. Or Denny's. Let's hit Denny's. Aren't you hungry? Come on. You could use some food. They don't want the party to end. They want to stay out until the sun comes up. They never want the night to end. They caught and sang the sun in flight. And that line in particular really harkens back to his coy mistress in that poem when we read that last week or the week before. The last lines of it. Thus, though we cannot make our sun stand still, yet we will make him run. They're partying. They're living it up so much that time is flying because they're having so much fun. And they don't want the party to end. It's that simple. And then you got the grave men. Grave men, they say that when you are close to death, you have that proximity to death, you start to gain insight in what really matters in life, the things that are really important. And you start to see, I valued all the wrong things. I should have been living my life this way versus the way that I did live it. Or there are people that I need to tell them how much they mean to me before I go. And so these grave men, with this insight that they have gained, they can see with blinding sight what really matters. And so they want the opportunity to do something about that. They don't want to go just yet. Well, now I know, and I want the time to make up for my mistakes. I want to make up for lost time. I want to tell these people how I really feel. I want to do the things that really matter. And so they, too, hold off death for as long as they can. And so up until this point, all of it is very general, very much kind of talking in general about an attitude towards death and a call to arms to us, the readers. Here's how you should live your life. Eking out every moment, sucking the marrow from life, seizing the day. And then we get to the conclusion, the last paragraph, the last stanza in the poem. And just like when I tell you when you're writing your papers, that's when you bring in the personal, that's what he does. And you, my father, there on the sad height. And it turns out this whole thing is not a general call to arms to people to live life to its fullest. It's very specifically that Dylan Thomas's father is dying. And he sees his father and says, Dad, you're a wise man. You're a good man. You're a wild man. You're a grave man. You shouldn't just be there on the sad height on your deathbed, looking at what's coming next and having come to terms with it, accepting what is happening. No, you should be fighting against it. And it's as simple then as a son pleading to his father, do not go. He knows he's going to be heartbroken by the loss, and he doesn't want his father to go. And so again, on one level, it's a general call to arms to any of us reading the poem to live life to its fullest, to hold off death for as long as you can, and even when you're 80, 90 years old, to still be living it up and partying and having a great time. But more specifically, aimed at his father, begging him, please don't leave me. Really gripping as a result. So we move on then to our next poem, Death Be Not Proud. And this poem could not be more different in its perspective on death. We just read, do not go gentle, and he's saying, fight against death, hold it off for as long as you can. And John Donne in Death Be Not Proud seems to be saying almost the polar opposite. Death be not, let me try that again. Death be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure. then from thee much more must flow. And soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and soul's delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and dost with poison, war, and sickness dwell. And poppy or charms can make us sleep as well, and better than thy stroke. Why swellest thou then? When short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. All right, so I said again, we're only talking about form when it really matters, when understanding the form of a poem is going to help us understand what the poem's about. And so very briefly, I'll mention that this poem is in the form of an English sonnet, popularized by Shakespeare, so sometimes referred to as a Shakespearean sonnet. If you're ever reading a Shakespearean sonnet and you're like, I don't get it, all the these and the thous and the antiquated language doesn't make any sense to me, the trick to understanding Shakespearean sonnet is in the last two lines. That the way Shakespeare did this form of the English sonnet is, it's three groups of four lines that are talking about an idea, and it all builds to this conclusion in those last two lines that rhyme separately. You know, here you got thee, so, throw, me, be, flow, go, delivery, men, dwell, well, then. And you can see that ABBA rhyme scheme. And then all of a sudden in those last two, eternal lie, die. Eternally is how we would say it, but back then they would have said eternal lie. Whole story I could get into in the great vowel shift, but we're not gonna bother with that. That those two words rhymed a little better back in the 1600s. But those last two lines are kind of like the answer to the puzzle, the punchline to the joke, the thrilling conclusion, the ironic twist at the end of the film. Anytime you're looking at something and you're like, I'm pretty sure this is it's by Shakespeare, okay? It's a sonnet because it's 14 lines and it rhymes. Look at those last two words. Jump ahead, skip ahead. Figure out what the poem's about from those last two lines. And then work your way backwards and say, okay, well, now that I know that, now that I've got that in my head, let me see how he plants the seeds for that going through. So what he does here, John Donne, in this poem, in his poem, Death Be Not Proud here, he's addressing death directly, like he's talking to the Grim Reaper. Grim Reaper comes in, big black cloak, skeleton, carrying his scythe, and he looks scary, he looks frightening. And John Donne says, knock it off, dude. No, this is not, you don't scare me. You're not mighty, you're not dreadful, I'm not afraid of you. You don't have any power over me. You think you're all that, but you're not. And so he sets that idea up in the first four lines, and then he goes from there to explain why. Why is it that he feels that death has no power? So first he says, from rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure, then from thee much more must flow. He basically says, so every night we get a sneak preview of what death is like when we go to sleep. Every night we go to sleep, and it's basically like dying, but just like diet dying, essentially. You know, it's not real dying. It's just like a little rest. Not the long dirt nap, just a brief respite. And what he's saying essentially is, isn't sleep awesome? Don't you all wish that you could get a little bit more sleep than you get? I am an insomniac. It's amazing how I get to like 10 p.m. and I can have been tired and dozing off on the couch from like 4 p.m. to 10 p.m., like nodding off, watching TV or something. But 10 p.m. rolls around and suddenly I'm wired. I'm wide awake. Like, no, this is the time when people of normal brains go to sleep. But no, I guess I'm going to be up till like 2 a.m. And then I got to get up for school the next day. And I'm like, oh, like 4 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep. That's great. That's great. I'll survive. But man, the weekends, when you don't have to set an alarm, when you can just sleep as long as you want to, oh, it's nice. We got a couple days coming up in this class when we're not gonna have class. Thursday, October 20th, a week from this coming Thursday. No class that day. I'm taking my daughter on a field trip for school. So you all, maybe you got a 9:30, so you still have to get up for that. But then you can go back from 11 to 12:15, you can nap. Or you can find a place on campus to just lay your head down. You ever have in elementary school your teacher say, okay, we're all just going to lay our heads down and take a little rest? If that ever happened to you, wasn't that like the best day? We all wish we could get more sleep than we get, and sleeping is amazing. And so he says if sleep is a sneak preview of death, then how great is it going to be to rest in peace, to take that long dirt nap? Now he's planting a seed of something here. He's not explaining it fully yet, but he's planting a seed here of how when you go to bed at night, you wake up the next morning. And so the sleep of death, what do you wake up to? Again, he's not explaining that just yet. He'll get to that at the end, but he's building up to it. And so then he goes to, soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and souls delivery. He starts talking about those good men that Dylan Thomas was talking about in his poem. Dylan Thomas said, good men, well, they don't accept their fate because they want more opportunity to do good deeds. But John Donne here is saying, no, good men look at the deeds they've done in life and they say, well, I've lived a good life. If it's my time, it's my time. Today, tomorrow, next week, next year, doesn't matter, that my bones will rest and my soul will be delivered. Again, here's a little clue, planting a seed, hinting at what's to come. He doesn't say what that means just yet. He'll explain that more fully at the end, but he's building up to it. So he says, I'm not scared of death because death is just a long sleep, and sleep is nice. And if you've been a good person, well, then you don't have to worry about what's going to happen when you die. Again, getting to a point that he's building up to. But then he turns his attention back to the Grim Reaper. And he says, you know why you don't have any power? It's because you don't kill people. Fate, chance, kings, desperate men, poison, war, sickness. These are the things that kill people. And these are the things to be afraid of. I'm afraid I'm going to get sick. I'm afraid somebody's going to poison me. I'm afraid that the king's going to... Yeah, that's a valid fear. But death just shows up after that stuff. Death shows up and eases your suffering if you've been sick for a long time. The suffering ends. The sickness ends when death shows up. We looked very briefly last week at a poem called Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson, where she compared death to a carriage driver. And that's essentially what John Donne is saying here, that death is like, somebody call for an Uber? Hop in. I'm going to take you to the next place. Death has no actual power. Death is a slave that gets told, pick these people up, take them to the next place, and doesn't decide who goes or who stays. It's just like an errand boy, a messenger. And again, all of that building up to that couplet at the end, the big reveal, last two lines. One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. See, John Donne, very religious man, to the point of, during part of his life, he served as an Anglican priest. And so he says, I'm assured in my faith that when I die, I am going to a better place. I'm going to wake up from my rest to something awesome. And death won't have any power then. death's hold over us will be over. So essentially, all of this is him saying, I accept death is coming. I welcome it. Because in the end, I've been a good person, and I know that when I die, I'm going to a better place. So why would that scare me? Why would I be afraid? So again, you could not be more opposite than these two guys in their perspectives on death. And to that end, let's imagine you decided you wanted to, I'm going to flip the camera around again here. Let's decide you wanted to write your paper due next week about one of these two poems, either Dylan Thomas and Do Not Go Gentle, or John Donne and Death Be Not Proud. Well, the ways in which you might organize this, let me, again, flip it around. I'm going to set it over here, if this works. All three people that are in the TikTok Live can see me right on the board then. So the tone of Thomas. Thomas's tone in Do Not Go Gentle is aggressive. Rage, rage. That line, he uses that word rage twice, and then that line is repeated 4 times. So rage at death is the key. Is the key word there that creates that tone. You also notice that he referred to crying and fierce tears and sad height and grieve and frailty. And he uses all these words that create a very negative tone because death means losing somebody, and that's sad. Whereas John Donne, if you look at his tone in his poem, he's welcoming death. Much more positive. He even uses the word pleasure to refer to death. So again, you couldn't be more opposite in tones. Thomas, when he refers to death, he uses a central metaphor of the dark. The good night, the dying of the light, dark is right. You're on the sad height, like you're standing on a precipice, staring into the dark abyss below. And we're afraid of the dark because it represents the unknown. We don't know what happens after death from Thomas's perspective. We don't know where we're going, what's happening. That death could be the end. I'm instantly thinking of Death Cab for Cutie. I will follow you into the dark. We don't know what's there, and at least we'll face it together in that song. Whereas John Donne, when he's using death as a metaphor, he personifies death to take away the power of death. The Grim Reaper is just a dude. It's just a guy. Death isn't this big, scary concept. It isn't fading into darkness or oblivion. It's just a dude. Just a guy. And yeah, he's big and tall and wears a black cloak and carries a sharp implement and is a scary, skeletal guy. But he's just a guy. And in the end, the whole poem is about taking death's power away from him. I don't know if any of you watched the Netflix show Sandman or read the comics that it was based on. But death there isn't even like the Grim Reaper. It's a lady who's pretty nice and is there to comfort you when it's your time to go. Death shows up and says, I'm really sorry this happened. Come with me. And very compassionate and kind. Death relieves your suffering. Death gets a bad rap. Now that perspective is largely based on, again, that fear of the unknown versus Donne feels like he knows where he's going. Donne feels I've got a faith in the afterlife. When I die, I'm going to my heavenly reward. I'm firmly an Anglican priest. I believe in the Christian concept of heaven, and that's where I am going. And so death isn't a scary concept for him. Whereas Thomas, again, it's an unknown. Doesn't have that faith, it seems, or at least questions where he's going. But the key, again, the unknown. But the really key difference between the perspectives of the two poems is that Dylan Thomas isn't talking about where he's going, he's talking about where his father is going. Whereas John Donne is talking about his own mortality, his own death. And in the end, it is a lot easier of a concept to wrap your head around that I am going to die someday, and I've come to terms with that, versus someone I care about is going to die, and I'm going to have to deal with their absence. I think I mentioned in class last week or the week before that just recently one of the members of the English faculty, Diana Lefevre, passed away. And these two perspectives, really kind of hit home. That on the one hand, I'm missing my friend. And not having her around anymore is hard. But it also puts into perspective, when is it going to be my time? She wasn't that old. 54. It's not that old. It can come at any time, unexpectedly. And so it makes you think about, how am I going to deal with what things do I need to have in order as a parent? Like, I need to get my will in order so that my daughter is taken care of. I need to make sure my life insurance is taken care of so that if I go, people aren't left behind with a stack of bills and things. And you come to terms with that mortality of yourself. All the time people will say, I'd rather it be me. Dylan Thomas probably would say, take me, death, instead of him. Let him live. Take me instead. And so I think in the end, the difference between these two poems boils down to that perspective. Who is the one who is dying? Who is this poem really about? Your own death or the death of somebody that you care about? Now, in the end, when you all write your poetry essays, you are not doing a comparison. You're picking one poem. But I kind of ran through it there. I mean, basically, that's your 4 body paragraphs. You got an intro and a conclusion to slap on there. You write it about Thomas, you write about Donne. There's an outline for you for your poetry essay due in 2 weeks? 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks from today. But if you looked at these two poems and you said, but I like the fact that they're kind of contrasting viewpoints, and I kind of wanted to do a poem that explored both points of view, well then luckily our third poem for today does just that. Elegy for My Father Who Is Not Dead by Andrew Hudgins. Essentially in this poem, the father is like John Donne in that he has come to terms with his mortality, whereas the author of the poem, Andrew Hudgins, is like Dylan Thomas, who doesn't want to lose his father. So this poem, in a way, is a combination of the two. One day I'll lift the telephone and be told my father's dead. He's ready. In the sureness of his faith, he talks about the world beyond this world as though his reservations have been made. I think he wants to go a little bit, a new desire to travel building up, an itch to see fresh worlds or older ones. He thinks that when I follow him, he'll wrap me in his arms and laugh the way he did when I arrived on earth. I do not think he's right. He's ready. I am not. I can't just say goodbye as cheerfully as if he were embarking on a trip to make my later trip go well. I see myself on deck convinced his ship's gone down. While he's convinced, I'll see him standing on the dock and waving, shouting, "Welcome back." So like I said, this poem essentially combines the two viewpoints. That the Father is ready. The Father is focused on the world beyond this world. The central metaphor that this poem uses for death is travel. Father thinks he's made his reservations. He's got a desire to travel and see fresh worlds. He's embarking on a trip, it says. And they talk at the end about how each of them are on separate voyages through life. But the Son doesn't think that there's a world beyond this world, or at least he's not sure. He suspects that when his Father goes, that it's going to be like watching the Titanic sink, watching the ship go down. Whereas his Father thinks, no, I'm just reaching my destination, and I'll be waiting there on the dock for you when you finally arrive. So again, we have both tones mixed together here. His Father is sure. He's got a new desire. Whereas the Son is focused on saying goodbye and the ship going down. So there's a mixture of the positive and the negative tones. The central metaphor being travel. And again, that perspective being different in whether or not they believe in an afterlife and whose death is happening here. It's so much harder to lose someone and deal with that absence than it is to be the one who's going. Kind of a short one, so we can move on from it pretty quickly. To our last poem we're going to talk about today, To Autumn by John Keats. Now, I briefly talked about John Keats last week. One of the poems that was in the exercise we did on Thursday was When I Have Fears That I May Cease to Be. And I briefly talked about that and talked about Keats. We're going to talk about him a great deal more today. You know, sometimes I see this thing on social media where people will say, gun to your head, you're forced to talk about a topic for 20 minutes, completely off the cuff. You're going to deliver your TED Talk, essentially, for 20 minutes about a topic. What would you choose? And some people are so scared of public speaking that they're like, I would choose the bullet. Just shoot me. I talk in front of people, talk in front of a crowd of people, completely off the cuff, unprepared, for 20 minutes? No, thank you. But other people are like, no, I have a variety of interests. I'd be able to talk about this thing for 20 minutes. I'd be able to talk about Disney movies for 20 minutes. I'd be able to talk about Star Wars for 20 minutes, whatever you're into. I'd be able to talk about the Cardinals this season for 20 minutes. To Autumn by John Keats would be my TED Talk topic. I'm going to talk about it right now for 20 minutes off the cuff. And I could do it for an hour and 15 minutes. I could do the whole class period on this poem if I really wanted to. But we've only got about 20 minutes left, so you get the 20-minute version. To Autumn by John Keats. Oh, again, gotta read along. Season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun. Conspiring with him had a load and blessed with fruit the vines around the thatch eaves run. To bend with apples the mossed cottage trees and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core. To swell the gourd and plump the hazel shells with a sweet kernel. To set budding more and still more later flowers for the bees until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has o'erbrimmed their clammy cells. Who hath not seen thee oft amid thy store? Sometimes whoever seeks abroad may find thee sitting careless on a granary floor, thy hair soft lifted by the winnowing wind. Or in a half-reaped furrow sound asleep, drowsed with the fume of poppies, while thy hook spares the next swath and all its twined flowers. And sometimes, like a gleaner, thou dost keep steady thy laden head across a brook. Or by a cider press, with patient look, thou watchest the last oozings, hours by hours. Where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? Think not of them, thou hast thy music too. While barred clouds bloom the soft dying day and touch the stubble plains with rosy hue, then, in a wailful choir, the small gnats mourn among the river sallows, borne aloft or sinking as the light wind lives or dies. Hedge crickets sing. Oh, no, I skipped a whole line. Sorry, the most important line. And full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne. Hedge crickets sing. And now with treble soft, the redbreast whistles from a garden croft, and gathering swallows twitter in the skies. Sorry about that. Skipped a line. And again, pretty key line as we'll talk about. So this poem to autumn, on one level, is what it says it is in the title. Does what it says on the tin. It's to autumn. It's an ode to autumn. You know, the season that we find ourselves in right now gets a bad rap. Summer, people are like, yay, it's warm out. I'm going to go swimming, or I'm off school. I'm going to go on vacation. I'm going to do something fun. Go to a theme park, or again, go to the ocean, or who knows. Then you got wintertime. In wintertime, people are like, oh, the snow is so beautiful. I'm going to sit inside. I'm going to snuggle up under a blanket. I'm going to read a book. I'm going to drink my hot cocoa and look at the beautiful snow, how pure it all looks outside. Or maybe I'll go play and build a snowman or have a snowball fight. Springtime comes. People are excited because things are growing. Things are coming to life again, and it's warming up. But autumn gets a bad rap. Autumn things are dying. It's getting colder. The days are getting shorter. People who suffer from seasonal affective disorder, this is when it starts to kick in. Like, oh, I hate autumn. And personally, I love autumn. It's my favorite season. You got Halloween, best holiday there is. You've got Thanksgiving. You've got leaves, raking the leaves, and there's one bit of yard work that I like. It's raking leaves, and I don't know why, but there's something about raking leaves that I love. The smell of it, it's peaceful. It's not too hot, like mowing a lawn in the middle of summer, you're like dripping with sweat, whereas, no, I'm outside raking a lawn. It's a cool day. It's nice. And Keats then is creating this ode to autumn in the poem. And he breaks it down into these three sections, these three stanzas, in which he's essentially talking about the early autumn, the middle of autumn in the second stanza, the second section, and the late autumn in the third section. So you can kind of see that imagery of him taking us through this season bit by bit. Starting off with talking about in the first stanza of the poem that fruit is still ripening on the vine. And gourds and hazel shells are still plumping up. Flowers are still budding. And it seems like warm days will never cease. So rather than an autumn day, an October day like we had over the weekend where it's 50 degrees, 60 degrees, how about an autumn day like we had yesterday where it's 81, high of 81 yesterday. Today it's rainy, sure, but the high's 76. You know, summer's not letting go. Summer's like, no, I'm not quite done with you yet. The early days of autumn, late September, early October, when it's still really nice and it seems like warm days will never cease, as he says there. So then in the second stanza, we get a lot of imagery related to the harvest. Talking about in a granary, collecting all the grain. He makes reference to a half-reaped furrow. And that's an image that I know that you're all familiar with because we live in the Midwest. That today, you might drive by a cornfield on your way home from school, and it'll be completely full. But a week from now, you might drive by that same cornfield, and it'll be about half empty because they're in the middle of harvesting, reaping the crops. Now back then, they didn't have combines and tractors and all the machinery. They had the human machine. You had a sickle or a scythe. You had a guy essentially who had a long stick with a knife on the end, a blade on the end, and he goes down the row, chopping down the crops. And then he gets to the end of the row and he gathers up all the crops that he collected and he tosses them in a bucket and he goes to the next row. And so when he's talking about thy hook spares the next swath and all its twined flowers, that's the image that he's presenting of somebody with the hooked blade going down the row, cutting down the crops and any flowers or any other vegetation that's kind of grown up between. So a lot of harvest imagery in the second stanza. And in fact, by the time we get to the end of the second stanza, we have two references to a gleaner and to a cider press that are taking us to the end of the harvest. And so to understand those practices, you kind of have to know a little bit about the way farming used to be done back in 1819 when he's writing this poem. A gleaner first. Now we're familiar with that word glean today because of gleaning information. That's the way we most often use that word glean today. Like you go on social media, you go on Twitter, you go on TikTok, and everybody's talking about a thing, but you don't know what they're talking about. Everybody's suddenly talking about, here's a good example. 6 months ago, maybe longer, I don't remember exactly, but there used to be an account on TikTok that was a dude that would talk about Star Wars and his Star Wars fandom, but he had a puppet that he would have talk about Star Wars. And people were like, that's funny, a little puppet's talking about Star Wars, this is kind of cool. Who is this guy? Who is this account? And so some people started to look into it, and they're digging into the guy's social media, and they're like, oh, he is secretly racist. Oh, that's great. And so you log on to TikTok then that day, and suddenly there's all kinds of videos coming on your FYP where people are talking about, hey, I'm a part of the Star Wars community here on TikTok, and I just want to say that I'm distancing myself from this guy. And you're like, oh, crap, what'd this guy do? What's going on with that guy? And you don't know. You don't know what they found out. They're not telling you what happened. And then like other people who did puppetry on TikTok are like popping up and saying, I as a puppet want to disavow the other puppet that's a secret racist puppet. Like, what? What's going on? Because you haven't seen the video. You don't know who they're talking about. Who are they talking about? Who's the guy? And you have to glean the information based on these context clues. Gather up these little scraps to figure out what the heck are people talking about. And it's that way with trending topics on Twitter sometimes. You're like, okay, why is everybody talking about this thing all of a sudden? Why is everybody talking about this person all of a sudden? Please don't let it be that they're secretly racist. Oh no, they're just dead. Okay, well, hey, thank goodness their legacy is intact. They just died. All right, that's a little bit better. You all know that I'm a geek and I like Doctor Who, and so one of the guys who was the doctor when I was a kid, Tom Baker, every now and then his name pops up. I'm like, oh no, did he die? Is he secretly an awful person revealing his horrible opinions? Like, no, he just did something silly, and people are talking about it. I'm like, okay, thank goodness. But you don't know at first when you see something that's trending. You don't know what are they talking about? What's everybody talking about? And you have to glean it. Now, this term comes from this practice in farming back in the day. That a gleaner was someone whose job it was to watch over the harvest while other people are doing the harvest and see if anything gets left behind. Again, we live in the Midwest, so you probably have been in a cornfield at some point in your life. I'm gonna guess that most of you have at some point been in a cornfield. And maybe you've been in a cornfield after the corn has been harvested. And if you ever have had that happen, you've been walking through the rows and you found a random ear of corn laying on the ground. Modern farming practices, those things are just written off as a loss. But back in the day, it's the 1800s, you need every scrap of food you can get. So a gleaner was someone whose job it was to watch the harvest, and when they were done going through for the day, they come in at the end of the day and walk up and down the rows and see if there's anything left. Oh, here's an ear of corn. It's kind of small, but that'll be good. Here's another ear of corn. Oh, it looks like a mouse has kind of been gotten to it, but let me break off that bit. And this bit's still good. We'll take that. Oh, here, this one's totally fine. Gathering up the scraps of what's left. That's what a gleaner did after the harvest. And a cider press is also something that traditionally apple cider was made at the end of the harvest. Apple cider, the way it was traditionally made, is really kind of gross. I love apple cider. I'm way more of an apple cider guy than a pumpkin spice guy when it hits fall. But apple cider is gross as a concept. As you don't pick apples that are ripe off the tree and make cider out of them. No, that you eat that or you chop it up and you put it in a pie or cobbler. Apple cider was made with the ones that have fallen on the ground and have been sitting there for about a week and a half, and they're rotting and they're gross and worms have gotten into them. And they scoop them up and they chuck them in the cider press. What's a little worm juice between friends? That's why we sprinkle it with nutmeg and cinnamon, and we say, it's still good. Now again, today we have like the FDA that's saying, let's try to minimize the amount of worm juice that you get in your apple cider. But it's not zero. Even to this day, there's not zero worms in your apple cider. There's some in there. And you just got to be like, let's not think about that. Let's not think about how hot dogs are made. Let's not think about, and just enjoy the hot dogs, enjoy the apple cider, and not think about the worm juice that's in my food. So both of these things, gleaning and a cider press, both of these references here in the second stanza of To Autumn are references to the end of the harvest. So that when we get to the third stanza, and it talks about the stubble plains. That's an image that, again, we live in the Midwest, so I know that you know this. Today you drive by that cornfield and it's full of corn. Next week you drive by and it's about half empty. Third week you drive by and it's going to be stubble. That what was big tall stalks has been shaved down to like stubble. Like literally like somebody shaved with a razor and left the stubble behind. So the harvest is done and all that's left in the field is a little bit of stubble of where the stalks once were. And there's a reference here in this section too, at the very end, the redbreast whistles from a garden croft and gathering swallows twitter in the sky. There's a reference to birds gathering to migrate south for the winter. Winter is coming. So essentially, the poem then walks us through the season of autumn. Early autumn in part 1, middle of the harvest of autumn, part 2, harvest is over and winter is coming in part 3. And again, if all you do is you read this poem as an ode to autumn, then it's a beautiful, beautiful poem about this season. But the second layer beneath that is that this is a poem that's about transitions and how natural transitions are. Change is something that scares us in life. But John Keats welcomes change, welcomes transitions, and is doing so by pointing out to us how natural they are. Every year we go from summer to autumn to winter to spring and back around again. And we're used to this cycle of life, of the seasons, the changing seasons. But no season is quite like the last one was. Sometimes they're warmer, sometimes they're colder. And he's pointing out the fact that really, when you think about it, we don't have 4 seasons. We have two seasons. We have summer, the hottest days, the longest days, and we have winter, the shortest days, the coldest days. And what's in between those times is just a period of transition from one extreme to the other. Autumn is that period of transition from the warmest days, warm days will never cease, to birds gathering in the skies to migrate south because it's getting colder. And so to really emphasize this idea of transitions, the way that he describes autumn in this poem is as if it's all happening in one day. That in the first stanza, he's got reference to sunrise or dawn. The very first 2 lines. Season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun. If the sun's maturing, it's growing, it's rising. And the mist is like in the early morning, during the fall. There's moisture in the air, and so it's foggy, it's misty. And gradually as the sun comes up, that evaporates. But early in the morning when it's still cool and the sun hasn't completely risen yet, it's hanging in the air like mist. And so then we get to the second stanza, where you're in the middle of the harvest, and there's a lot of references to it being midday or noon. That you're in the middle of the workday, and you need to take a break. That the person working in the granary decides, oh, all right, I've been hard at work for the past 5-6 hours. I'm gonna lay down. I'm gonna lay down for a little minute. Take a little break. I've been going up and down the rows, swinging this hook, the human machine working. My arms are tired. I need to sit down, have a little rest. Maybe take a little nap. So then I can wake up half an hour later, and get back to work to wrap up my day. So references to kind of lunch break or an afternoon nap. And then we get to the last stanza where it talks about barred clouds bloom the soft dying day and touch the stubble plains with rosy hue. And that's the sunset. Dusk. If the day is dying, it's because the sun is setting. And the rosy hue that touches everything is because when the sun sets, the sky turns orange and red and pink and all these beautiful colors. And everything kind of gets that color cast over it. So not only is he walking us through the transitions of early autumn, mid-autumn, late autumn, but he's also taking us through morning, noon, and night. And saying, here again, we have change. And it's such the background of our lives that we don't think anything of it. But every day, the sun comes up, the sun hits its peak, the sun goes down. It's constantly changing. And we're used to it because it's a cycle that repeats. But it's change. It's part of our lives. It's a natural part of living on this planet, of being a human. And so saying, don't fear change. Change is a part of life. Change is a part of who we are. And all of this leading to the third layer and how it then has something in common with the other poems that we read today. That this is a poem about death. In particular, if you get to the end of the poem and you see all these references to the sunset is the soft dying day, that the noise the gnats make is a wailful choir mourning, that the breeze is the light wind lives or dies. And perhaps the most important image in the entire poem, the line that I skipped when I was reading it aloud, on accident, and full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne. So generally, when lambs are fully grown, they are sheep. For a lamb to be fully grown as a lamb, it's being led to the slaughter. And so a little silence of the lambs kind of reference here. The lambs are crying out because they know they're being led to the slaughter. Their lives are being cut short as lambs. And this is where understanding who John Keats is and understanding kind of the background of this poem really helps. See, John Keats was a person who had a deeper understanding of death from a very young age than most people. Age of 13, 14, he was orphaned. His father had died earlier. They kept horses, and his father fell off a horse and died, broke his neck. And then when he reached teenage years, his mother died of tuberculosis. So he's an orphan, very young age. And some family member comes along to be his guardian, and it's like, I don't want to take care of the kid. And so what he does then is he says, hey, I know a guy who's a surgeon, and he's looking for an apprentice. So I'm going to send you to live with him. He's going to take care of you. You're going to get 3 meals a day. You're going to get clothes. You're going to get shelter. All your needs are going to be taken care of, and you're going to do the work of an apprentice to a surgeon. You're going to learn the trade along the way. Now, of course, this is the 1800s that we're talking about here, and the idea of sterile equipment was not a thing. And so the medical practices that he was trained in, of course, led to the people who were being operated on frequently dying. Because, like, let me clean this scalpel. All right, here you go. You wiped it off on your shirt, like a little bit. Is that's it? Maybe dip that in some sanitizer or something, please. No, they didn't believe in that. They didn't know that was a thing at the time. So 7-8 years, Keats is working with this guy as an apprentice to a surgeon, and then he gets a job in a hospital. Again, it's like an intern, we would call it today. And when he finally gets to a point at the age of 21 where he can decide for himself, he's graduated, he's got his degree, and he's going to choose what he wants to do, he says, screw this, I want to write poetry. And he decides at that time, one of the first poems he writes, he says, oh, for 10 years in which to explore poesy. He says, I'm going to give it 10 years to chase my dream, to go after this dream of being a poet. And if in 10 years I don't make it, well, then I can fall back on my career and my medical knowledge, and I can do that. But let me give it a shot. And the thing is, he only lived 5 more years after that. He only got 5 years. He died at the age of 26 from tuberculosis, the disease that killed his mother, the disease that killed his older brother, one of his older brothers. He got sick, and he knew it was coming for him. Today, tuberculosis is easily cured, but back then it was a death sentence, and it's a horrible way to go. Basically, your your lungs start eating themselves, and you eventually are going to choke to death on your own blood. Like, not a pleasant way to go. And today, again, modern medicine, you get a couple injections and you're going to be good. But back then, death sentence. And he knew it. He's like, I'm coughing up blood. This is not good. I'm going to die. And so he wrote this poem in September of 1819, and he was dead by February of 1821. And that last year and a half of his life, he was sick and he didn't write. This is one of the last poems that he wrote. He is a full-grown lamb, loud bleating from hilly bourne. He is the lamb crying out that it's unfair, crying out to the heavens, I shouldn't be dying. I'm just a lamb. Let me grow up to be a sheep. Unfair that he's dying so young. And yet, he says, where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? Think not of them. Thou hast thy music too. Even though he knows it's unfair, even though he's angry at the universe, at God, for doing this to him. At the same time, he's not just fighting against it, trying to get every moment out of life that he can, but he's also understanding and accepting of it. He's like, nothing I can do. There's no cure. It's going to happen. So I might as well find the beauty in the time that I have left and fully appreciate that I'm in the autumn of my life, even though I should be in the spring of my life. 24 years old when I'm writing this poem. I should be in the springtime of my life. I'm in the autumn of my life. That's unfair, but it is what it is. And so I might as well find the beauty in these moments. And so it's a poem about the autumn and praising that beautiful time of year. It's a poem about transition and change and how that's natural. And it's a poem about death. In particular, one man coming to terms with the fact that he's going to die, but he might as well make the most out of life while he's still here. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So there you go. I'm going to end the live now. Thank you for the two of you that are still here. Thank you very much.